Hello, and you are welcome to this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monahan, and this week I am joined by my colleague, political correspondent with the Irish and Sunday Independent, Cónal Thomas. Cónal, I think we'll start with housing. It was kind of the big showpiece of the week, the thing that we were building up to up until Thursday, and then the ministers, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, they donned the hard hats, they hit one of the building sites and they unveiled a brand new housing plan.
Micheál Martin had a pen? I think he's writing on a wall. Anyway, the housing plan has finally been delivered and we're nearly a year into the coalition.
Yeah. We were expecting it much earlier than this.
Yeah,
very delayed.
We were expecting it originally around, was it June, July, and then the National Development Plan came out and they said, well, now that we've got the funding certainty, we'll finish off the plan, and here we are, nearly Christmas. Look, any case, what's in the plan? Well, I suppose...
So start with what's not in the plan, which is annual targets.
Yes, no annual targets. I had been hearing this from a number of government sources over the last couple of days, and they were making the argument, in private, some of them are making the argument effectively, if we put targets each year, it's a rod for our own back. And they're right to a certain extent, because we saw the repeated pressure that the government and former Minister Darragh O'Brien came under, and then there was that massive cock-up, let's face it, towards the end of the last government, where Darragh O'Brien said, we're going to build 40,000 homes this year. We're going to go through the roof on the completions, even far surpassing our own targets. It didn't come to pass, and the government has really never been forgiven for that. But in any case, it does set a target, 303,000 homes by the end of the decade. That's contained in the programme for governments. They aren't going to roll back on that. And it does set other targets. So we're looking at about 12,000 social homes per year. Part of the mechanism for doing that is to financially incentivise local authorities. They're going to have a league table, it's been described as. You're going to be punished, If you don't come up to scratch, you're going to see who's on top, and you'll be down the bottom.
And we heard Simon Harris in the Dáil on Thursday. He was during leaders' questions, and there was that question of I think Labour's Conor Sheehan had said that's not what local authorities want. They don't want this incentive. They want better communication with the department. They want help and they want support. Yeah. But then the flip side, what Simon Harris was saying was that, like you said, there is this league table. There are some local authorities who are doing absolutely everything they can to build the number of homes that they need in their areas, but there's some local authorities that are doing very little and aren't seeing the level of development that we need from them. So do you think even that kind of idea of an incentive is a good idea?
I think it could. I mean, I think there's both. You can see both sides of the argument. I think one thing that all local authorities would agree on is that the hoops that they've jumped through the Department of Public Expenditure are a huge problem now. They are looking at cutting the 4-stage approval process for social housing down to 1. And again, this whole plan, it's been described as a repackage, right?
By the opposition.
By Sinn Féin. If you use the word repackage, I don't necessarily mean that in a pejorative word, because the government actually has taken a lot of steps in the first 9 months. The problem is we're just not seeing the delivery and the fruits of those efforts yet, right? Whether that's cutting the VAT rate on the sale of apartments, whether that's changing apartment guidelines and standards to incentivise development, get the private sector back up and running after collapse there. This is going to take months. And look, speaking to government sources today, I think there is a widespread acknowledgement that next year, don't expect a whole lot either. Even that 12,000 social housing figure. I mean, just one example, like it's written in black and white in the budget expenditure that there's only capital funding there for 10,000 next year.
So do you think that actually that goes to what, removing the annual targets idea, that they're going to struggle? We know it's very unlikely, if not now near impossible, that they're going to hit the targets for this year. Yeah. You're saying that people have told you that it's unlikely that they would have hit the previous targets next year. But I mean, I think it just pushes the problem out further and further, because let's say they don't hit next year's targets, even though there aren't the annual targets. And if they want to get to 303,000 homes by 2030, that's in and around 60,000 homes a year. There's still some kind of target there. If you have one big target at the end, the government are in massive, massive problems before the next general election if they don't hit 300,000 homes. Even if they hit 200,000, it's a big problem. Half of that is even worse. Like that, it seems that they're just setting themselves up. Like they've pushed it out and pushed it out, but there's still a massive issue there regardless.
That has to be the gambit, I suppose, that they're making. It's a huge risk. It's a gamble. But if you think that that uptick may not happen next year and it may begin to go up in 2027, 2028, 2029, and bear in mind, we'll have a general election late 2020. If at least the government can point and say, well, hang on, we're near 50,000. Well, the public may go, okay, I can see the progress. You know, I can see where you're getting here. And that's the risk, I suppose, they are taking. The question in all of this is, will all of this slash and burn policy around cutting that rate and all the stuff we're going to see coming through on infrastructure and all the changes to wastewater planning and everything else, the tackling judicial reviews, they really are throwing the kitchen sink at it. Whether that's going to yield what it needs to. And bear in mind, we're already behind. The demand is already behind. Like the 300,000 is actually not enough.
And we know as well, we had that Future 40 report that came out from the Department of Finance, was it last week?
Yeah.
That said that we're not going to hit peak demand until the mid-2030s.
Yeah, I mean, it said that effectively the housing crisis will last for another 15 years. Now, that's in a no-change scenario. What James Brown, the housing minister, says, we're changing everything. So, you know, let's see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to be overly harsh on this plan, but one thing that did struck me a little bit was there's very little in it, or rather what's perhaps more interesting is what's not in it, because very little in it around economic scenarios. It does mention a downturn.
Yeah.
What happens in the event of a downturn,
or another pandemic,
or well, potentially, or how do you tweak policies? What are the alternatives? What alternatives you put? What are the variables, the scenarios? There's very little in there. It's sort of a static document going, in effectively its own no change. This is the policy. We've given the policy certainty to the private sector. We're now putting the screws to ourselves as the state to deliver. But a lot can go wrong in 5 years. A lot can change.
I can also understand why people watching in here who are trying to understand what the housing plan is would still be don't have a whole lot of hope that they are going to be able to buy the house, that their rents are going to come down, that, you know, demand is going to be able to it will no longer outstrip supply. Because this is one plan. We had another plan that was launched in 2021, another one in 2016, and then go back to 2014. Alan Kelly had his own plan when he was Environment Minister. It's really hard, I think, for some people to get on board with another plan.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. In the plan, there's a number of references. It doesn't mention a future downturn, but it does reference a number of times the downturn and the economic crash. It's a point the government and the state always come back to.
Yeah.
They're not wrong to. It decimates the construction industry.
It explains it.
It explains it. It sets it in context. Rebuilding Ireland in 2016 from Simon Coveney was a pretty unambitious document. We've seen homelessness rise in that time. Now, there's a lot in the plan on homelessness we might touch on in a minute. But yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, and for maybe the person who's living at home, they may not take much hope from this, because the state's, and we know this behind closed doors in government buildings, the entire, you know, betting the house, excuse the pun, is on if supply increases to a sufficient point, then prices will come down and everyone will be able to buy a house. Can that happen in 5 years? I don't think so.
Yeah, and even Owen O'Brien was bringing O'Devney Gardens up, and that, you know, that was an affordable housing scheme. And some of those are going for €500,000, arguably not affordable for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, I think the government would say, well, let's hang on a minute. They're absolutely perfect spec homes. They're 3-bedroom. They're in a very central location. You know, you do just have to counterbalance that. I think O'Devny's always used as a good example because it was such an old social housing estate. You were never going to replace that, though, with what was there, right? Not in the market. And the government knows it can't control the market, but the government's hoping now the market will come in, build, while the state itself builds up. And, you know, we saw today this expansion of the LDA, the Land Development Agency.
How important do you think that'll be?
It could be. I mean, it's kind of been touted a little bit by some as a potential game changer. The idea being that the LDA, which is the state's affordable housing delivery body, will become the biggest deliverer, as it were, of affordable homes in the state. They've now been given an extra 2.5 billion euros. They have about 8 billion euro they can draw down immediately to go out, and they'll now move into kind of getting private land. The problem with the LDA up to this point, by and large, has been while they delivered about just over 2,000 homes between 2018 and 2024, a lot of them were to do with Project Tussie, which basically meant that the LDA came in and not bailed out developers, but it was stalled developments and got them back up and running. The idea now is that the LDA will expand to more parts of the country on private land, go and acquire and go build. So, yeah, I mean,
the argument's been put forward, though, in relation to the LDA, whether or not it has the powers to be able to do what it needs to do. Like, we hear very often about the idea of whether or not, the compulsory purchase order element of this, and whether or not they will be able to have the power and be not incentivized, but given the power to be able to do what they need to do.
Yeah, the CPO is a really difficult one.
Yeah.
It's quite a tricky piece of legislation, and it's not that often used. Now, I understand there are plans between, I think, the Department of Justice, Department of Housing to bring forward new CPO legislation to make it easier to go do that, but there's been very little progress on that, and I think there may be a little bit of a standoff between both departments at the moment.
Okay, let's talk about homelessness. You brought it up there a little while ago. 100 million euro is being set aside, being earmarked to tackle long-term homelessness.
Yeah.
In particular, the people who are singles who are on the homelessness, but also the bigger families as well. We knew that homelessness was going to be a big part of this housing plan. We've seen the homelessness figures going up and up and up. You see them almost at the end of the month, and that I think we hit 16,500, almost 17,000. Over 5,000 of those are children. Again, the government have said that they want to tackle child poverty and they also want to tackle child homelessness. That there needs to be a greater emphasis on that. So what are the measures that are being brought in relation to tackling that?
Yeah, there's a number, and one of them that you mentioned is there's this 100 million euro fund immediately that they're going to bring forward to help single people and the people who've been in emergency accommodation the longest under the second home acquisition scheme. Now, effectively, that does mean that the state's competing against itself, but they see this as a necessary mechanism to at least try and get some people the longest out of homelessness. I think there's a couple of, it's interesting in the plan, talking to a few people today, there's the core crux of, I suppose, the ending homelessness plan, and it is a vague enough commitment, because bear in mind, under Housing for All, homelessness was supposed to end by 2030. That's not mentioned in this plan, right? There is no reference to it. But the key to this is going to be the number of social homes and social housing. There's other interesting measures in there in terms of allowing domestic abuse victims to switch between housing lists in further away local authorities, because if you go from leash to the next county, your abuser may be nearby. So there's small measures there included. But I mean, I think the way to frame this plan is it's about accelerating delivery, as it's been described, and it's about helping homeless. The rest, the private sector, is not really included, because they'll say, we've done this, let the private sector go. And the state, in a way, it makes the state, it holds the state more accountable in one sense and less in another.
What do you mean?
Well, it puts its feet to the fire, saying all of these things are the states, I suppose, things they can control, right? So at the end of 5 years, the end of 2 years, the end of 3 years, whatever it is, you could measure by what's in the plan. The private sector stuff less so, and that's why they kind of let themselves off a hook by, say, not setting the annual targets. Because you remember in Housing for All, there were targets for private build and private rental. They're gone now. And what the state can point to as well, we did what we could for the private sector. We gave them the policy certainty. We cut through the infrastructural red tape. There's nothing more we can do.
Yeah, but that's a problem though, isn't it? Because when we have the government saying the state cannot facilitate the level of building that the country needs to see, that we need the private sector. Is that where the problem comes in there? That, they say, oh, look, well, we did all we could and it just didn't work? That really can't be good enough.
I don't mean to sound cynical by saying that. I mean that's me saying that maybe in 5 years' time. Let's see how it gets on. We've the RPZ changes coming in. They're going to be in an imbalance there.
Yeah.
That is going to impact a lot of people. But on the one hand, it can be argued it will incentivise supply. The same with the cut to the VAT rate, the same with the change to the apartment guidelines, which have already been challenged in the courts, and obviously the government's going to be coming out swinging, fighting that. Let's see how they get on. All I'm saying is that there have been ambitions to do what it can for the private sector, and they've listened to the developers. This is the thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember, for years the developers were vilified? They were not listened to. perhaps with good cause, in the earlier days, and now they are the biggest home builders in the country, and they've been brought into the fold. And all of this policy has been largely informed by them and other bodies and agencies that have agreed with them effectively. So now it's a case of the government, this is a benchmark really, this plan. It's the government saying, we have this, we're going to hold ourselves to account through these measures. And we've given the private sector the policy certainty, because that was the thing the private sector was always up in arms about, because, as you say, we had so many housing plans that changed so much. This is the government now saying, here's your trajectory, here it is. And what's interesting is that there's one small thing in the plan where they're going to go and do these road shows, which were kind of derided under Darragh O'Brien, which is kind of come and build in Ireland. This is the policy. This is the policy certainty we can now offer the private sector.
Yeah. To sum up, for people who are looking to buy a home, they're either renting at the moment and it's astronomical and they want to be able to buy. They're in the box room. You know, they want to buy a second-hand home that they're trying to move on. They're in a chain. How long do you think that they will have to wait? And I think it's an impossible question, but the reason I ask it is that James Brown was asked this on Wednesday before the launch of the plan, and they said, what would you say to people who want to buy their own home? And he just said, hang on.
Hang on.
And I just think a lot of people will be so frustrated to hear something like that, because they've been hanging on for years.
He can't make a hostage of fortune too much, can he? He can't say, I'm going to put this date on it, I'm going to put this target on it. And they're not. They're keeping things vague because they don't know. Yeah. Really, they don't. They're hopeful. I think best case scenario, if all the levers were pulled, if all the levers that have been pulled worked effectively, if all the infrastructure interventions work, and if the state itself can go out and build more in the form of the LDA and incentivise the local authorities as well, you could be looking at a decent turnaround in what we're looking at in maybe 3 years. It could be a decade.
What we see. Okay, I think we'll move on. But something that we had heard in the last 2 weeks or so was Fianna Fáil backbenchers saying that they were really frustrated with actually the level of delivery in housing, and, you know, some going home to their constituencies and having to talk to their friends and family and their constituents and having to answer to the housing issue and the housing crisis. But there is still another crisis going on in Fianna Fáil at the moment, and this is the ongoing rumblings, fallout from the presidential campaign. We had another parliamentary party meeting on Wednesday night. So what happened in relation to that and the review in particular?
It's almost a perma crisis,
isn't it? It just, we can't get over, and I think it's because this review, like as we will get to, has been delayed for another 4 weeks. I think nobody's going to be able to get closure, you know, the Fianna Fáil party or us who's covering it, until that review is over.
I know there's a point there though, I thought, with Fianna Fáil before this week. It was reaching Tory levels of being internecine, really. It was anyway. So, yes, it was relatively short and sweet in the end, thank God, last night at the Fianna Fáil PP, because so last week, obviously, they were told that the review had been delayed. They weren't given past the November 11th, which was yesterday's date, etc. They weren't told when it would happen. And what started out as kind of a day of expecting fireworks and all the rest of it petered out. Micheál Martin got up and gave this quite impassioned speech about how he's a duty to lead and that...
fulfill his mandate
and deliver, etc., etc. And then the review team, Tom Brabazon, who's one of them, TD for Dublin, Dublin TD, I should say, he effectively said that there's a lot of work going into this. There's still work to do, still people that need to be interviewed first, and that the review will now won't be complete until the first week of December, the end of the first week of December. What's interesting with the timing of this is that, has Micheál Martin taken the air out of this? You know, has he been successful? The thinking has always been that once the review is delivered, published, and TDs read it, it'll all blow up again. Yeah. And a no confidence motion will go in. I'm not so sure now.
Why though? Do you think that's because of what will be contained in the review? You know, there's some people arguing that it'll be a whitewashing. You know, we know Jim Gavin isn't going to be participating in this. This is very much going to be the Fianna Fáil leadership's side of what happened in relation to that, but also that there'll be more recommendations. What will we do going forward? How do we have to change things? And maybe again that might just take the air out of it.
That's it. And I think if the review is comprehensive enough, see, the thing is, there's always been the rebels, right? Was it Barry Cowan described this week as a cluster bleep? The whole affair, I should say. But anyway, there's always been those rebels. But then what emerged over the last few weeks, I suppose, was this middle ground. You heard a lot of talk about the middle ground TDMs, right? And these are the ones who were frustrated about delivery, and then kind of their minds would begin to think, and they kind of go, no, do you know what? And then this sort of sense is creeping into the party of this housing plan is going to be a bit of a dud and all the rest of it. But the point I was going to make was, if it gets to the end of the first week of December, right, and let's say those middle ground TDs are just, let's just get on with the job, right? Because my understanding that there was more efforts to get them on side this week anyway, but
Get them on the rebel side.
no, get them on.
On the leadership side.
The leadership side, yeah. So anyway, but let's say, if as some people had speculated, a no confidence motion was going before Christmas, if that review is not delivered, bear in mind there's no commitment to publishing the review the first week of December. It'll be completed. Could be the following week. The last
before it's delivered to the
before
party.
say it could be delivered to the party, right? That's just, I'm hypothesizing here, but that's what could happen. And then you're into the Christmas break. The question is, 4 weeks is quite a long time.
Yes.
Will the air have gone out of this? In saying that, if the review is damning on the leadership, well, that changes things entirely. But are we expecting it to be?
I don't know. Like, I think that we don't know what to expect from this. I think we have heard some people saying we need to know, for example, how much was spent.
Yes.
In relation to that. And I think maybe that could be a point that could be quite difficult for people, that they see that so much money was spent by the party and that the campaign did fail. It completely failed. Caved in on itself.
Yeah.
So I think that could be one element that people could really get very angry over. But I think you're right, the timing is interesting if it's been pushed out for another few weeks. And partly the reason we understand that it's been pushed out is that so many of the parliamentary party made submissions, and then they requested that they wanted to be interviewed and do oral submissions.
Yeah.
That takes time.
Yeah.
And like, we have 4 people who are on the panel, 3 of which are part of the Fianna Fáil party. There's 2 TDs and a senator. They have their other jobs to do as well as this on top of it. So they're taking that on, and it's trying to find the time to talk to all of these people, interview the leadership as well. It does take time, and I understand that it does take time. But like you said, pushing it out into December, and then, as we saw only a few weeks ago, when the TDs go on recess, they're not all together.
No.
How does
not talking to each other.
Not talking to each other. That kind of changes the dynamic of a crisis.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, particularly as well with the housing plan and Micheál Martin's kind of impassioned speech last night, that, as I say, those kind of middle ground TDs will maybe just want to get onto it. I mean, get on with it. It is interesting. It does seem like an awful lot of TDs and, TDs, Senate members of the parliamentary party have contributed to this review. So Tom Brabazon told them last night that there's extensive work going on, which to me would imply that this is going to be a substantial enough document when it is delivered. But is it going to be 90 pages of what Fianna Fáil TDs want to see happen in 7 years, the next presidential election, when Micheál Martin's long out the door and could be running for the Áras himself? Yeah. It'd be pretty dull, wouldn't it?
It will. But let's actually talk about the race for the Áras, because, of course, another big showpiece of the week was the inauguration of Catherine Connolly. We were watching it from Leinster House. Our other colleagues were over in Dublin Castle. What did you make of it? What did you make of her speech?
I thought it was
it was political.
Good shot across the bow of the government, but you wouldn't have expected anything else. I mean, it's hardly surprising, is it?
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
I mean, maybe for some people it's surprising. I thought it was the former head of protocol, I think, was on RT afterwards saying, I wasn't quite expecting that. But yeah, I mean, like she referenced her campaign, and she was quite forthright in what she said, where people doubted us and they didn't believe that an alternative republic was possible and that their voice could be heard, and we effectively showed them wrong. It set the tone for her presidency, didn't it? Because what we were, and we were, I think we're discussing this a little bit a few weeks ago, if not longer, was, what kind of president she will be. Will she follow in the footsteps of Michael D? Almost certainly. Will she be more?
At least what Michael D,
exactly.
if not potentially more, in terms of being outspoken on the topics that she feels the need to give voice to. Yeah. My curiosity is how the government will respond to that.
Yes.
Because they were very cautious in, I wouldn't necessarily outright critical of Michael D. Higgins when he would make certain speeches or comments. They would, towards the end, maybe push back a little bit more than what they usually would have. I wonder now, will they be more inclined to do that?
It's interesting because a lot of TDs in the Dáil, up until a few weeks ago, Catherine Connolly was one of their colleagues, an opposition colleague who they would clash with. Behind the scenes, you would have senior figures in parties or TDs briefing against Michael D anonymously, say, oh God, what's he said now, and blah, blah. I don't know, will they be more open about it? You know, will Simon Harris come into conflict with foreign policy issues? You know?
Of which we know they differ.
Of which we know they differ. I get the sense he won't, because I get the sense that the president
is the president.
President is the president, but who knows? I mean, we're in for an interesting 7 years, if nothing else. Oh, I hope we are anyway. But I thought overall the inauguration was solemn and serious, but, you know, it's always, these occasions are always a bit of crack as well. You know what I mean?
A bit of pomp and ceremony.
A bit of pomp and ceremony. Who doesn't like it? And it's one of those funny ones, regardless of who's being inaugurated or who's going into the office. You're texting your family, you're texting your friends and your family WhatsApp group saying, oh, I like, you know, look, Bertie's outraged, or Bertie, you know.
Michael D. Higgins is on the phone.
My mother-in-law texted the family group the other day, saying something, was during the inauguration, saying Bertie is raging. Thanks, C-Matt.
And I think on that note, we'll leave it there. Cónal, thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for watching this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monahan, and we will be back next week, of course. So don't forget to subscribe to the Irish Independence YouTube channel.